Donald Trump once bragged that nothing could surprise him anymore. But on a freezing morning in Alaska, he became the one left stunned as Air Force One descended toward Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. Trump wasn't just walking into another diplomatic summit. He was about to step onto a stage built out of money, power, and paranoia with a price tag of $10 billion. Above him, the sky roared alive a B-2 stealth bomber worth over $2 billion cut through the clouds, flanked by 4 F-35 Lightning IIs, each burning through nearly 85,000 in an hour just to fly. It was a thunderous welcome. But then, all eyes shifted to a single object, the flying Kremlin, Putin's custom-built Ilyushin, a flying fortress so extravagant that even Trump, a man surrounded by gold-plated interiors his entire life, fell silent. Intelligence sources later whispered Trump was speechless. He didn't say a word, and that was only the beginning. Because what unfolded next wasn't just a show of military hardware. It was a glimpse into an empire of security, a paranoid fortress where every detail from a DNA-proof briefcase to bodyguards nicknamed the Musketeers, each towering over 6 feet tall, to an armored motorcade that moved like a mobile battalion, was engineered to protect one man at any cost. The real question wasn't how powerful Putin appeared. It was, why does he need such an overwhelming security machine in the first place? And the answer, the revelation Trump stumbled upon before leaving Alaska, especially what came to light in the final moments of this summit, will force you to rethink what power actually looks like. August 15th, 2020, Alaska's frozen wilderness, usually a quiet stretch of snow and silence, suddenly became the most watched piece of land on the planet. The eyes of Washington, Moscow, Kiev, and every major intelligence agency in the world were fixed on a single military base, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. Trump's arrival was supposed to be routine. His aides briefed him on talking points, focused on Ukraine negotiations and trade discussions. He expected stiff handshakes, press cameras, and the usual diplomatic choreography. But the moment Air Force One's wheels touched down on the icy runway, something felt different. Anchorage, usually a city of fishermen, oil workers, and tourists chasing the northern lights, had been transformed into a fortress. Streets were locked down. Entire neighborhoods emptied of traffic. Residents watched from windows as convoys of armored vehicles and black SUVs thundered past, helicopters cutting across the Arctic sky in synchronized formation. The city looked less like a welcoming host and more like the set of a war movie. Even before Putin's plane appeared, the U.S. Secret Service had deployed hundreds of agents, importing vehicles from other states and even housing officers in motels because Anchorage didn't have enough capacity. Local restaurants were suddenly serving men in dark suits with earpieces, while Alaskan hunters joked that the moose had less freedom of movement than the president's. To Trump, this was more than just security. This was theater and atmosphere carefully designed to amplify tension. And when Putin's aircraft finally appeared on the horizon, gliding through the Arctic clouds like a silent predator, Trump realized he wasn't just here for diplomacy. He was walking into the middle of a high-stakes spectacle where power wasn't negotiated, it was displayed. The sound came first deep, rolling thunder that shook the icy ground. A shadow streaked across the Alaskan sky. Then, like something out of a Cold War fever dream, a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber emerged, its black wings slicing silently through the clouds. Moments later, 4 F-35 Lightning IIs flanked it in a perfect diamond formation, their engines roaring as if to announce America is watching. The cost of this brief spectacle, astronomical. The B-2 alone operates at $135,000 per flight hour, while each F-35 burns nearly $85,000 per hour. All of it orchestrated for one single purpose, to remind Putin that even in Alaska, the U.S. could summon overwhelming force at will. But what stole the show wasn't America's firepower. It was what appeared next on the horizon, Putin's personal aircraft. The Ilyushin IL-96-300PU, better known as the Flying Kremlin. To the untrained eye, it looked like another presidential jet. But to those who knew, it was a flying fortress worth $500 million to $1 billion, customized to survive nuclear war. Its interiors are rumored to include gold-plated fixtures, a war room with encrypted communications, even an independent oxygen supply designed to keep Putin alive during chemical attacks. As the flying Kremlin descended, it didn't just carry a president, it carried the weight of a paranoid empire. Trump, a man who had spent his life surrounded by marble towers, private jets, and golden penthouses, stood frozen for the first time in years. He looked impressed, or maybe it was something closer to disbelief, because this wasn't just Putin arriving in America. It was Putin bringing with him an entire worldview: security as theater, paranoia as power, and survival at any cost. On the ground, the spectacle became even more surreal. The U.S. Secret Service, already stretched thin, had been preparing for weeks. Hundreds of agents were flown in from across the country. Entire fleets of armored SUVs were shipped north because Anchorage simply didn't have enough. Local hotels and even suburban motels overflowed with agents, technicians, and drivers. It was a billion-dollar machine at work. But then, Putin's security detail stepped off the flying Kremlin, and suddenly, it was as if America was staring into a mirror. For every American sniper on a rooftop, a Russian sniper appeared opposite. For every Secret Service agent sweeping a corridor, a Russian bodyguard mirrored the movement. If the U.S. deployed 10 counter-surveillance officers, Russia deployed 10 of its own. Body for body, gun for gun, step for step. This wasn't cooperation. It was competition security as a form of psychological warfare. Analysts later estimated that the Russians flew in hundreds of Federal Protective Service FSO operatives, each handpicked from Putin's elite guard. These weren't ordinary men. They were trained for 5 years at specialized academies, drilled in languages, combat, espionage, and endurance. To the Americans, they seemed almost robotic tall, expressionless, scanning every inch of the frozen base without a flicker of emotion. The cost of this duel spiraled fast. U.S. taxpayers shelled out an estimated $9 to $15 million for the summit covering Air Force One, cargo planes, logistics, and manpower. Russian expenditures were classified above, but insiders believed they matched or even exceeded American costs, especially once the flying Kremlin's entourage was factored in. Trump had seen international summits before, but never had he witnessed this two superpowers locked not in diplomacy, but in a silent contest of paranoia, each side measuring its strength through the choreography of guards, convoys, and weapons. If Trump thought the mirrored security was unsettling, what came next pushed the summit into the realm of the bizarre. Putin's guards didn't just protect him, they enforced rituals that bordered on obsession. Take the Musketeers, the nickname given to Putin's inner circle of bodyguards. Each man stood well over 6 feet tall, built like professional athletes, and trained for 5 years at the FSO Academy. Their curriculum was unlike anything in the West advanced combat drills. Convoy tactics, foreign languages, even psychological conditioning to withstand freezing cold without showing discomfort. They weren't just soldiers. They were sculpted to embody loyalty, discipline, and intimidation. Then came the infamous DNA briefcase. Wherever Putin travels, an aide discreetly carries a special container designed for one purpose, ensuring none of his biological material is left behind. Even waste, according to multiple intelligence reports, is collected and flown back to Moscow. To American eyes, it looked absurd. To Putin, it was survival. Meals weren't simply cooked, they were tested. Portable laboratories accompanied every dish, with multiple tasters sampling food before it ever reached Putin's plate. Even hotel fixtures, light bulbs, curtains, bathroom fixtures were often ripped out and replaced with Russian equipment before his arrival, just in case of hidden surveillance devices. To Trump's team, it was overkill. They joked privately about the paranoia, but the jokes faded as they watched the discipline of the Musketeers. There was no laughing when a Russian guard refused to let an American technician near a security camera without direct clearance. Trump himself, a man accustomed to extravagance, marble lobbies, private jets, gold-plated bathrooms, found something different here. This wasn't luxury. This was fear weaponized. And it forced even him to admit Putin's world operated on rules no American president had ever lived by. By the midpoint of the summit, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The cost of this operation was staggering. American taxpayers footed a bill of $9 to $15 million just for Trump's side, covering Air Force One's $3.2 million round trip, additional cargo and press planes, and the sprawling Secret Service motorcade that had to be flown in piece by piece. But Putin's price tag made those numbers look modest. His Federal Protective Service, FSO, commands a workforce of 50,000 personnel, more than the standing armies of some European nations. Analysts estimate his security empire consumes upwards of $10 billion when factoring in the flying Kremlin, armored Horus limousines, mobile command centers, and the Musketeers' relentless global deployment. What startled Trump wasn't just the dollar figures, it was the way Russia allocated its resources. In 2023, Putin's personal security spending surged to $186 million in just 5 months, outpacing Russia's border protection budget. Entire air defense systems, Panzer S-1 missile batteries, were physically moved from St. Petersburg to shield Putin's private residences, leaving one of Russia's largest cities more vulnerable, simply to reinforce a president's paranoia. The contrast with Trump's own protection was glaring. The entire Secret Service budget for 2024 stood at $296 billion, covering the president, vice president, former presidents, visiting dignitaries, and the agency's national operations. Trump's own annual protection in Florida cost around $35–40 million in Putin's Russia. That amount would barely cover a fraction of a single security convoy. To Trump, this was more than excess, it was distortion. A system where one man's safety dictated the spending priorities of an entire nation. And as he watched Putin's entourage move with military precision, he began to realize this wasn't just security, it was a political message, broadcast in real time to the world. As the hours dragged on, the spectacle of Putin's security empire revealed its true nature. This wasn't a one-time performance staged for Alaska. It was simply how Vladimir Putin lived every day, everywhere. Trump learned that Putin had already survived at least 20 documented assassination attempts from Chechen militants in the early 2000s, to ISIS plots, to the infamous 2023 Kremlin drone attack. Each attempt had hardened him further, convincing him that survival required not just vigilance, but paranoia elevated to state policy. Every detail Trump witnessed seemed designed to remind him of that reality. 4 concentric rings of security encircled Putin wherever he went: inner bodyguards, undercover agents in the crowd, perimeter teams, and rooftop snipers. His armored limousines, Horus Senates, were mobile fortresses, equipped with oxygen reserves and defenses against chemical attacks. Even his residences bristled with missile systems normally reserved for frontline battlefields. The numbers spoke louder than the spectacle. Russia's defense budget had swelled to 18.2 trillion rubles in 2025, over 160 billion, with nearly 40% of federal spending funneled into defense and security. Not for the people, not for infrastructure, but for a single man's protection. Trump, who prided himself on luxury and opulence, found himself shaken by the difference. His wealth was about image, branding, and power projection. Putin's luxury was something darker, a fortress mentality, where every gold-plated wall and every armored vehicle carried a price tag written in the suffering of ordinary Russians. As the final F-35s and F-22 Raptors escorted the flying Kremlin out of U.S. airspace, Trump reportedly turned to an aide and muttered a single phrase: "This isn't security, this is an empire." And in that moment, he understood. Putin wasn't just protected. He was entombed inside a billion-dollar cocoon of fear, one that reshaped an entire nation around a single man's survival. For Donald Trump, the Alaska summit ended with a sobering realization. What he had witnessed wasn't just a diplomatic meeting or even a military display. It was a window into a system where one man's survival outweighs an entire nation's future. Putin's $10 billion security empire is more than bodyguards and armored jets. It's a monument to fear. A fortress built not on trust, but on paranoia. Funded by resources that could have gone to schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. And that's what left Trump shaken: the sheer absence of limits. in America. Even presidential protection is bound by budgets and oversight. In Putin's Russia, security knows no ceiling. So the real question is this brilliance from or madness? And what do you think? Comment below. And if you want to dive into another shocking story, don't miss Kim Jong-un's family is richer than you think.